Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a sledgehammer to a boundary marker that has stood
So, let's talk about a math problem. A problem that for 200 years, the greatest minds in the world believed was literally impossible to solve. This is the story of the unsolvable equation.
And here it is. This is the star of our show, the general sixth degree polynomial. Now, for centuries, this thing, and really any polynomial of degree 5 or higher, well, they represented a kind of hard limit, a wall that mathematicians just couldn't get over. It looks complicated, I know, but trust me, its story is even crazier.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? For two straight centuries, finding a general, exact formula to solve this was considered mathematically impossible. But why? What created this intellectual brick wall that stood for so long?
To get to the bottom of that, we've got to jump in the time machine. We're looking at the 2 century limit and asking, was this really an unbreakable law of mathematics?
Just look at this timeline. It's kind of wild. Back in the 16th century, you had mathematicians like Cardano and Ferrari who were on a roll. They cracked the third and fourth degree equations. Awesome. But then, nothing. Progress just slammed to a halt. In 1824, Niels Henrik Abel basically declared that degree 5 and higher are impossible to solve with a general formula. And for almost 200 years, that was it. That was the final word on the matter. Well, until 2023.
So this is the culprit right here, Abel's impossibility theorem. And the wording is the key to this entire story. It says there's no general solution in radicals. Now, what does that mean? It just means you can't find a solution using the standard tools in your math toolkit, things like square roots, cube roots, and so on.
And don't get me wrong, this wasn't some minor, obscure little theorem. This thing was foundational. It basically drew a line in the sand and said, this bar and no further. As the source material says, this theorem has defined the very limits of mathematical possibility. It was accepted as gospel, an absolute truth.
which is where our story takes a really sharp turn. We're now challenging the dogma because one mathematician has made a claim that sounds, well, to be honest, it sounds kind of heretical.
That mathematician is Professor Murad Sultan Ezouidi. In 2023, he dropped a bombshell. He announced that he had found a complete and exact symbolic solution for the 6th-degree polynomial, a direct challenge to what generations of mathematicians had accepted as fact.
This wasn't some fluke or a sudden discovery. It came from a place of deep personal conviction. As Professor Ezouidi himself put it, I have never accepted that limitation. So this is the story of someone looking at a wall that said impossible and deciding to walk right through it anyway.
So you have to be asking, how in the world did he claim to do it? Well, it required a totally new way to solve the problem, pitting a completely new framework against the old, limited tools.
Right, so why did the old way fail? Well, like we said, it was all about radicals. Those were the only tools they were using. But the internal structure of these higher degree equations is just way too complex. It's kind of like trying to open a sophisticated digital lock with a simple set of physical keys. The tools just don't fit the problem. And so for 200 years, mathematicians had to settle for numerical approximations, which are basically just really, really good guesses instead of exact answers.
And this really gets down to a fundamental difference in philosophy. You have the classical outlook, which basically accepts that some things in the universe have inherent limits, that some things are just unsolvable by us. But then you have Ezouidi's outlook, which completely rejects that kind of mathematical fatalism. It says, no, every equation has an exact form, and our job is just to be clever enough to find the right tools to reveal it. Okay, let's put these side by side because it makes it super clear. On the classical side, you've got impossible. On Ezoudi's side, you have exact, symbolic solutions. The whole theoretical foundation shifts. It moves away from the old ideas of field theory to something new called recursive structures, which is just a fancy way of saying you break a big problem into smaller, repeating versions of itself. And here's the kicker. We go from relying on approximations to a claim of 100% algebraic, verifiable accuracy. So that brings us to the new blueprint. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. How exactly does this new theorem claim to work?
All right, think of it like a three-step process. First, you take the polynomial and you reorganize it. You peel it back into recursive layers, kind of like an onion. Second, you apply a series of special transformations to those layers. This helps reveal hidden patterns and symmetries. And finally, after all that structured work, the exact symbolic roots just emerge from a chain of algebraic identities. It's a process, not a guess.
The engine that drives this whole thing is a universal recursive formula. This isn't just a vague idea, it's a systematic, repeatable machine that calculates the different pieces of the roots one by one with total algebraic precision.
So let's just take a breath for a second. If this claim is verified and accepted by the wider mathematical community, it means we're looking beyond what we thought was impossible. We're staring at a completely new mathematical horizon. The absolute core of this entire claim comes down to this number, 100%. The method is described as purely algebraic and verifiable, with zero room for approximation errors. This is the difference between being close to the target and hitting the bullseye every single time. And you know, the knock-on effects? They're staggering. A totally new paradigm for solving these equations would be born. The very idea of an unsolvable polynomial, it might just disappear. This would actually redefine what we mean when we say we solve an equation. And it could open up brand new frontiers, not just in pure math, but in every field that relies on it.
You know, I don't think I can put it any better than Professor Ezouidi himself. He said, the sixth-degree equation is no longer a symbol of impossibility, it is the final proof that algebra itself has no upper boundary.
And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. If a mathematical impossibility that stood for 200 years can be challenged like this, what other impossibilities in science, in technology, in anything, are just sitting there, waiting for someone to come along with a new way of thinking?